Scott Nichols, how are you, sir?
Matt, I'm great, and it's good to be here. By golly, it's been a few weeks since we visited Neil Hot Springs, but I have been binging, literally binging through a bunch of your podcasts. And what you do, I want to just say, what you do for the community is awesome. The amount of knowledge that's available, if people listen to the ranch, is incredible. So thanks for what you do.
Oh man, listen, it's the wildest time ever. I get to spend like 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day, just ingesting information that I would never, under any circumstance, ever in a million years know. Like you, sitting here, a geothermal expert who took a whole day and like took me down and showed me a geothermal. Like, there's no one I know who's ever seen a geothermal plant or understands anything about it except for industry insiders. And it's wild. No, like, to be clear, one of the reasons geothermal jumped out immediately is, one, we enjoy the heat of it around the Treasure Valley and even in the city of Boise. I took a picture of this building about 7-8 months ago. It was like, this building's heated by geothermal. I was like, son of a gun, it's right here.
And it's right here.
It's fundamental to what we're doing in the state, in the country. It's one of the green energies it's one of the few green energies that represents baseload 24-hour power that is really green, baby. You pump hotness out, you use that to drive a compression cycle, the whole thing, and boom, you get power.
And you got power. And Matt, it's, Boise has the largest geothermal heating district in the country, if not the world. 650,000 plus square feet of office space in Idaho, office space, and that doesn't include residential, heated by geothermal heat. I made a comment a number of years ago, a long time ago, like 15 years ago. Somebody said, wow, we're going to have a lot of geothermal power plants in Idaho where we're ground zero for geothermal. And I said, well, this was an agency person. I said, well, not really. And they said, what? We've got geothermal heat everywhere. I said, we do. But let me be clear. It's this low temperature geothermal heat. We've got a lot of low temperature that we've been able to take advantage of. And so Boise, like a few other small towns around the West, and Boise's a big town now, we do have a really cool geothermal heating system. And if you have not seen it, you need to go get a tour of that.
Listen, I was talking to somebody just like a month ago, and they told me they could get me in to go check it out. But to be clear,
we'll go together.
Okay, I love it. Somebody sent me a map actually yesterday of the United States, and it had, for geothermal, it had two distinct colors. One was a yellowish color that was like good for heating, and then one was red, which is like heating and electricity. So the distinction there is obviously you have to get to a point where you can run essentially have a super pressurized and heated liquid that then can be allowed to expand, presumably like 300 degrees or something. But for heating, it's like if you got 150 degrees, you can run heating. That's fine. But that's not going to run your like pressurized steam function.
It's not going to generate electricity. I had a call last week from a gentleman that wanted to do the same thing. And we're probably getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. So let me back up just a little bit. And so, you and I looked at Neil Hot Springs as a binary cycle geothermal power plant operated by Ormat Technologies. Interestingly enough, Ormat didn't build that plant, and that plant utilizes the R134 refrigerant. So that plant won't be built again. At least Ormat does not build those types of plants. But Neil Hot Springs and Raft River represent in Idaho this binary cycle technology that is not as common as our low temperature geothermal resources that are across the Snake River Plain and across the Great Basin for that matter. So you're right. We've got, when people ask me, and to be clear, I meet with communities, county commissioners, and tribal councils all over the Great Basin. And I do these Geothermal 101 presentations, and we talk about the advantages of geothermal, what it means to a community, how it might affect the community. I was in Weiser, Idaho, and we had I presented to the commission, and then we had a community meeting with regard to some leasing that the company wanted to do with the state of Idaho. It's really important to communicate the expectations regarding geothermal, because geothermal has sort of hit the front page, and the interest around geothermal has never been higher. But let's talk about these three types. We've got this low temperature geothermal resource that we all enjoy. Don't you love to sit in a hot spring?
Sure.
We can go to Stanley Basin. We can sit in the hot springs, all across the West. We love to sit in hot springs. And those sources, you're right, represent this low temperature geothermal that can be used for direct heating. There's one other source of it's not geothermal heat, but it's the ability to use the ground as a geothermal heat source, a heating pump called ground source heat pumps. And they're basically using the ground, the consistent temperature of the ground, to provide cooling or heating capacity in household or commercial electric purposes. So for commercial electric heating and cooling, you can, instead of using air, they use ground source heat pumps.
May I ask a question? Go. Okay, so what is the temperature of the ground that they would be around? Let's say it's like...
I'm a generalist. I'm just saying 58 degrees.
Great, 58 degrees. Great. So essentially what you do is you're like, okay, look, let's pump liquid or something from my house down really far to get to that consistent temperature, and that earth that pipe is in contact with all along the way will either be absorbing heat or expelling heat depending on the heat of my house.
The season of the year.
And then it hits a loop and it comes all the way back up and brings that liquid that has either been heated or cooled by the surrounding earth. And then that goes around my house and either heats it up or it cools it down. So if the earth underground is like 68 degrees, we're like, perfect. I'm going to be 68 degrees year round, because even if my house is 75, I'm going to pump all the 75 degree air or water down. It's going to expel 7 degrees of heat, come back at 68 degrees or thereabouts. Or if my house is trying to go below 68, no. You pump the 66 degree water down, it absorbs heat and comes back at roughly 68 degrees.
You're describing exactly right. And you know what's interesting about that? There's a little community on the corner of Eagle Road, the southwest corner of Eagle Road and the freeway.
Okay.
Those houses had water-sourced heat pumps. Each house had a little pond. And that water, again, provides a little more fluctuation than the ground, but they use the same concept in water. So they throw this big coil of pipe into a pond, or bury this big coil of pipe. You don't necessarily have to drill down straight down. If you've got lots of land area, you can actually create just this little big pipe system, in your backyard if you wanted to. Excavate your backyard and do it that way. But you're right. And then that heated fluid comes into the house and is transferred in an in-floor heating system, heating and cooling system, or you can run it over a coil and draw air across that coil and put it into forced air in your house. So there's ground level, no pun intended, ground source baseload geothermal heating in your house.
Slightly unrelated, but similar concept. So we're talking about having pipes engaging with some kind of heating thing, right, in the ground or somewhere.
Right.
There's a concept of compost heap heating that I was talking to one of the Ada County commissioners about on an episode like last week. And the idea is you have, let's say, like an 8-foot round, area, 8-foot circle, right? And you do a layer of hay, and then you put a bunch of coils of black pipe on it, and then you do another layer of hay, a bunch of coils of black pipe, layer hay, and you go all the way up to like about 6 feet, and you have this giant cylinder, 8 feet in diameter, 6 feet in height, and then you pump water through that. As the hay decomposes over the whatever amount of time, creates heat, and you can run a heating cycle through that if you just pump water through, and it comes out at like 140 degrees or something.
Yeah, it's really, really hot. I've not heard of it, but
it's pretty wild. I sent him an article about it because it's one of those, you know what it is? It's one of those like Instagram, social media, like I made a natural hot tub. Like, look at me, I stacked some dumb hay and blah, blah, blah. But like, it actually works, and it's like old school, and it's a pain because then by the time the heater dies, it's like, okay, we've decomposed now you got to like take everything apart. It's like,
you got to make it again.
Yeah, you got to make it again. And then you got to wait for it to start, again, essentially fermenting. It's like, it's a big train wreck. Yeah. Yeah. But it's a wild time running coils of water or heat or refrigerant, what be that to absorb or expel heat, over ground or some kind of earth mechanism as a mechanism is essentially what happens with geothermal.
Right. That's exactly right. So then we've got this next level of heat. We've got this now we've got hot water. We've got a geothermal resource that comes up to the surface or that we can access through a well, and we use that directly in our house. That's what the downtown heating district.
Gotcha.
I think there are several, I think up to 5 different heating districts with well systems that, they heat the Capitol, they heat the City Hall.
Big buildings
and they
downtown.
heat all of Warm Springs, exactly, all the big buildings downtown.
And what's the temperature generally of that water? Because you're not going in that water like a hot spring.
No, I want to say that's, some of those temperatures, I'm going to go by memory.
Sure.
So don't quote me on it, but I want to say it's like 110.
Gotcha.
110 to it. I don't know.
So it gets up there.
We'd have to check with those experts there, but it's too hot to be swimming in.
Right. Right. But not hot enough to run a big electrical cycle.
Gotcha. So, the Idaho Geothermal Working Group, we've got Dr. Roy Mink, we've got Stephanie Walsh, the founder of Walsh Engineering over in Eastern Idaho. A few folks get together every month. We talk about geothermal resources in Idaho. And I think we all agree that the low temperature geothermal resources in Idaho, they're far more prevalent, but they're also the most underutilized. And it's a function of planning and financing. Is how do you plan to use this stuff? It's, contractors really don't know how are we going to integrate this heat source into our building. But it's far easier to do on new construction than retrofit old construction.
Oh, yeah.
So,
and you said Dr. Roy Mink?
Dr. Roy Mink.
He's not local, is he?
He is local, and you need to have him on this program.
Okay, there we
go. He's a better expert than I am. But
so the idea would be, okay, look, we are exploding in growth right now. Look, we get heat in general from two sources. If you want to heat your house, you can either do the classic forced air heating mechanism. You could do, radiant heating, which requires you heating up water and which you're probably going to use gas from. Or you use electric heat pump. Electric heat pumps.
That's where I am.
Right. So you have these two real options. Now, both of these, Idaho Power, I think, derives 40% of its electricity from gas plants. So even if you're using electrical, you're likely using gas because 40% of the electricity. So it all essentially boils down to gas. So we have this large dependency on our natural gas pipelines and our natural gas supplies. So ultimately, with the expansion of the Treasure Valley and the other population centers, if they could expand but tap into geothermal heating mechanisms that don't have a greater tax on our gas supplies, that's a win for everyone.
That would be a win for everyone. But the next level, Matt, that we talk about of geothermal resource really is these what we call medium temperature resources. The medium temperature resources. And again, this is the way that I look at it and define it for communities and folks around the Great Basin, is anywhere from about 270 to 320 degrees, 340 degrees Fahrenheit brine. We call it brine because it has total dissolved solids, silica, chalcedony, these minerals that have been dissolved in it. If you don't keep the brine when you're subtracting some of the heat in the process to generate electricity, if you don't keep that brine either elevated in pressure or temperature, you have the potential to build up scale in your pipeline systems.
So that's
hard water deposits.
Yeah,
arterial sclerosis.
Yeah. And then after a certain amount of time, that stuff just clogs everything.
You start to clog up your piping system, and you've got to do a lot of maintenance. So you've got to work not very hard, but you got to be careful about the temperature and pressures that you're operating at. But these moderate temperature or medium temperature geothermal resources are not nearly as common as our low temperature resources, but they are incredibly valuable. It's really interesting. I told on Tuesday, I had a big group that we met with, all state of Idaho folks. We met over at Neil Hot Springs and looked at that power plant. And as we finished the tour up, I said, jump on Google Earth and draw a line from Weiser, Idaho to Truckee Meadows, California. Truckee Meadows, Nevada, I guess. Yeah, Nevada, right south, just south of Reno. And on that line, you will see and be able to look at dozens of hot springs along that route. And it's this great big fault system that runs through our northwestern corner of the Great Basin and produces all of these medium temperature resources. So you've got Vail, Oregon, produces Neil Hot Springs. The BLM just had a lease sale there. The Vail Front Keeney Pass is an area that looks very much geologically like the Neil Hot Springs geology and could host some medium temperature resources right there. The ones that generate electricity. Raft River, built in 2000, went online in the fall of 2007, I think November 2007, was the first binary cycle geothermal plant built in the Northwest, built by Idaho, the Idaho folks, and right here out of Boise, Idaho.
May I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
You've used the term binary. Binary. Is this emphasizing we use a coolant and we have the brine, so we have a 2-cycle? Is that the like 1 or 2, or?
That's a great question, and I'm sorry I didn't define that binary, Matt.
No, it's okay.
So yeah, no, that's exactly right.
Okay.
We talk about with this medium temperature geothermal brine. Then we take the heat from that brine and transfer it to a secondary working fluid. And that secondary working fluid stays in a confined loop. It's converted from liquid to vapor. When it gets converted from liquid to vapor, it spins a turbine because of that built up energy. It's directed over that turbine. And on the exhaust side, it's then cooled down, turned back into a liquid, and recycled again and again and again in a closed loop cycle. The geothermal brine is pulled up out of the ground, is used to heat that working fluid, and then it gets put back in the ground in a way that it can support that water, that brine that gets injected back into the ground has to be close enough to the source that it supports the source long term, but it doesn't cool off the source too quickly. So
it can't be too far away that it goes to a different water balloon, but it can't be dumped directly in and screw up the heat of the original water balloon.
Absolutely.
Gotcha.
So these are renewable resources. Like most of our resources are renewable: timber, cows, grass, corn.
Sure.
They're all renewable. But as a community, do we operate them sustainably? So geothermal, like anything else, needs to be operated sustainably. And that's what we look at in the geothermal world. So
and so again, and my apologies. So the binary cycle emphasizes these 2 loops, which is obviously directly distinct from the original. Like if you're sitting in a hot spring, that is the hot water coming out of the ground.
Yes, sir.
So that would be like a monocycle. It's like, no. This is it. It comes up, you interact with it, that's it. And the other one, it's like, no. It comes up, and then we have a secondary cycle. These things are closed off from each other. They never interact aside from exchanging heat. And that's the whole bit.
That's the whole bit.
Great.
That is.
Great.
So then, really the third tier, and there are 2 areas in the country that look at this third tier of geothermal. Sonoma County, California, the Geysers region, Sonoma County, Lake County, and then Imperial Valley, right down just 2 hours east of San Diego, in the Salton Sea. Those 2 areas of California produce, in our country, some areas that produce superheated geothermal brine. It is so hot that when you open the valve or drill a well, it comes out of the ground as superheated steam. It is, and I'm generalizing, but it is a steam resource that has so much energy pent up and underground that when you open that valve, it has enough energy to drive a turbine directly and spin that turbine and then be released to the atmosphere or condensed with some of that brine being put back into the reservoir. But those areas only occur in 2 spots. That's Sonoma County, California, Sonoma and Lake County in the wine region, and then down in Imperial Valley.
Okay, so that one is literally, we have like a rocket under the ground, and all we need to do is point the rocket at that turbine. It's like Top Gun style. And it just comes out and it spins that wheel. But the consideration obviously is, are you recharging that? Are you giving that so you have this heat, right? You have this heat under the ground. You happen to have that brine there too. And the brine, let's say you got 100 gallons of brine. And it's like, just like all kinds of heat. And you pop a straw. You're like, dude, just fire that brine right here, baby. You spin the turbine. Well, the 100 gallons goes to 99 gallons, goes to 98 gallons. The heat is still down there. How do you recharge that brine if you're releasing this brine to the atmosphere once it goes through the turbine?
Matt, that's a really good question. And what happened in Sonoma County and in that Napa Valley region, the Geysers, California, is that they didn't recharge it.
Oh, no.
So from like
I don't know anything. I don't know anything about this. And even I know you got to put the water back in there because like the heat source will continue existing. But if you don't have anything to bring that heat source up out of the ground, which is the brine, you don't get the heat source.
You don't get the heat source.
Oh, no.
So so California, they discovered this Geysers geothermal field. And from the 60s on, they were developing this geothermal field. But everybody wanted a piece of the field. Oh. Now, California doesn't have a rule or a law in place to require owners to share resources. So unlike the oil and gas industry, everybody put their straw in the milkshake, so to speak, and the milkshake declined. And they realized fairly quickly that the geysers geothermal field was not going to be sustainable if they continued to operate at the level that they were operating. So there were a number, I can't give you the entire history here. We can look at it at some point in time. But bottom line is there were some operators that went out of business. Some wells didn't produce. The production declined. And they said, what are we going to do? So they went to the city of Santa Rosa and said, City of Santa Rosa, you've got a bunch of wastewater. What if we pipe this wastewater? It's relatively clean. I mean, you can put it in the river. You can put it in the ocean. It's not full of solids per se. So what if we take your wastewater and we'll pump it 40 miles or so, and we'll pump it up here to the geysers and we'll distribute it and we'll put it back in the geothermal field. And so that's what they do today.
God,
they pump it back up there. And the geysers geothermal field now has been stabilized at about, I think about 700 megawatts is what they're stabilized at to produce now baseload energy out of the geysers at 700 plus or minus megawatts. And I think more will be developed in the geysers, but it will be developed in a manner that is sustainable with the current production.
The wastewater reutilization question is actually one. I had Steve Burgos in here, who's director of Boise Public Works.
Steve Burgos.
Big fan of Steve.
Yeah,
Came in, like we had an interview lined up, and then I was on a water tour, and I met, I was like, oh, you're coming in next Tuesday. Like, I'm Matt.
Yeah.
Anyway, he comes in. We have this large discussion about let me ask you, how many thousands of acre feet do you think Boise Public Works pumps of wastewater that's cleaned and then put back into the Boise River? How many per year? What do you think?
Oh, acre feet per year? I have no idea.
30,000.
30,000.
They pump. We calculated it on the episode.
Low, actually.
It could be, but we do know that if you take away 30,000 acre feet from the Snake River at the point of Boise Public Works, somebody downstream is going to say something. What Boise Public Works is ultimately trying to do is figure out how to take that wastewater and help the Micron expansion. So it's like, no, instead of just dumping it back in the river, what if we take it up to Micron? Right. And so they don't have to turn on the tap. That's nice potable water. It's like, hey, look, don't drink this, but whatever you're doing, it's totally fine for that. Like whatever. And so but the question becomes, who owns that water?
Downstream from the Boise water treatment plant that people depend upon there's a lot of folks downstream that depend on that water.
But is the 30,000 acre feet out of Boise Public Works considered a water resource that can be owned? Is that a water right? Or is that like, no, we already put in for that water when we got it to go to our anyway, a different.
That's a big question.
So Santa Rosa, again, the OG of, hey, let's take this wastewater, let's put it back up here and use it to renew this resource. Now, a question for you, there's a problem with the Central Valley Aquifer in California in that it has been pumped so aggressively and in an unregulated manner that the aquifer actually in places compressed. So you have your bottle of water and you essentially crunch the bottle. There you go. You crunch it, and when you try to get it to come back up, it's no longer coming back up to its former glory. So you have this aquifer that is supposed to be, porous rock that is compressed because there was nothing holding it in place. When they exhausted or really dropped down that geothermal source, did they lose capacity for water storage because it compressed?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
No.
Not, and again, I would assume it's a much smaller water reservoir than in the Central Valley.
Well, and I think the rock type's a little bit different. It's not a sedimentary basin that had been built up or almost held up by the hydrologic profile underneath it.
Sure.
It's more like a fractured crystal at depth, thousands of feet of solid rock that's fractured up and superheated, and you have this water that migrates through small fractures all through that rock basin.
And I would also assume that even if you dropped the amount of actual water in there, you have a steam bubble that creates an enormous amount of pressure. So even in the absence of water that would fill it up, you still have an enormous amount of pressure that's pushing on those cavities.
Certainly pressure that's putting on those cavities. I wouldn't characterize it as a bubble because there's not like a defining,
there's not a ridge.
Of it.
Yeah, sure.
There's not a ridge, but
steam clouds,
steam
pocket.
Whatever it is, it is areas of really high pressure and high steam production, and areas that don't produce as much. Absolutely.
Okay. So coming full circle, these are our geothermal profiles. Idaho has a lot of potential for at least one, which is utilization within the building industry to help heat and cool houses.
We've got that opportunity.
We also have a smaller opportunity for electrical production. And it's my understanding that's electrical production kind of in the southwest area of Idaho.
In fact, Matt, that's a really good point, because the BLM just issued the first geothermal leases in Idaho that have been issued since 2006, I believe. They have not leased geothermal resources in Idaho since they leased the Raft River leases in about 2006, I believe, is when they leased those.
Holy, I did not know that. That's great. But these are explorative leases, right?
They are exploration leases. And those leases have generated a huge, really significant, I shouldn't say huge, but a really significant level of interest from the community, from the agencies. How are they going to affect? How are these new leases going to affect the communities? What's the geothermal industry going to do with them? What's going to happen here? So the areas that I know that have been actually put up for auction right now are some areas around Crane Creek, just east of Weiser, and the Almaden mine. So we've got that block of land there. We've got in Oregon, I should say in Oregon, we've got a block of land just south of Vail, Oregon. And then we've got a block of land northwest of Glens Ferry, southeast of Mountain Home, and then south of the Mountain Home Air Force Base. As you know, the military installations across the country are looking for secure power. And so I think there's some interest there. There has been for a long time. But these are areas that are known hot rock areas that haven't really been fully explored or available for really thorough exploration. What hasn't gone on the market yet that I think the BLM still has to offer is some areas in the Bruno Basin, south of Bruno, going toward those may have been already offered. I'll have to check and see. And then we've got an area around Magic Hot Springs on the north side, and then over to eastern Idaho, northwest side of Grace Lake area. Gotcha. So those are sort of the geothermal hotspots out of Raft River and Vail, Oregon, that have been up for lease. So,
may I ask a question?
Yeah.
You mentioned hot rock right before we got going. I instantly thought craters of the moon. I'm like, hot rock. Yeah, I've seen lava before.
It used to be hot.
That's not what it is, right? Like hot rock is a distinct type of geothermal resource in that the geothermal resource that already has brine in it, that is ready to come out of the ground, and you just got to open the pipe and let it go, that presupposes a heat source and a liquid of some sort that can transfer the heat up to the surface and you can utilize it. But a hot rock resource is, we have heat, we just don't have any liquid or transfer mechanism to get that heat naturally existing from the bottom. So this is where you actually have to figure out a way to insert liquid into it, capture that heat transfer, then pump that liquid back out. Is that accurate?
So in the description of hot rock, Matt, you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly right. At these resources that were just leased by the BLM, we don't know if that situation exists or not. We don't know if those are binary cycle resources. And I think primarily the industry that's looking at these, the industry's looking at these sources as being potential for the production of binary, two fluid geothermal systems, traditional 270 to 320 degree brine that heat can be transferred to a working fluid. Incidentally, when we talk about heat transfer to the working fluid, we're talking about using about 150 or 60 degrees of heat from that brine. So even when it goes back in the ground, in these medium temperature electric production facilities, you have brine that let's say comes out at 300. We extract about 150 degrees of heat off of that brine. It goes back in the ground at 150 degrees. I will guarantee you do not want to take a bath in 150 degree water.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's still too hot. It's still really, really hot.
And it needs to be, you can't take it down to like 50. Because if you take it down to 50, then you start, right.
Take it down to 50. Then we talk about scale and deposition of sediments and things like that.
Gotcha. As you were talking about this, it's like, okay, it's great that we have these two different available things, electricity and then like home heating.
Direct heat.
One you can transfer. across the state or across the West. The other you can't. So if you want to heat a home or a building, you better be really close to that direct source. But if you're talking about making a hot rock or a binary cycle, you can transfer that hundreds and hundreds of miles through transmission lines, because now you're just dealing with an electrical source that can go on whatever electrical transmission.
Once we generate the electricity, yeah, it goes on the grid.
Okay, so it doesn't, like, even if we're saying these resources are available, let's say there's only a resource available south of Mountain Home. Great. That doesn't mean that Idaho Power can't pump that anywhere throughout its transmission lanes.
We can put in a binary cycle power plant if it proves up to be available there. And you're right, we'll generate power at outside of Mountain Home someplace. That power goes on the grid. And then, incidentally, these power producers sell it to the utility. They negotiate a power purchase agreement. The utility then puts it on the grid, and they need that power. They want the baseload power because the metas of the world want more power. So
now, the Magic Valley is home to a lot of agriculture, a lot of dairy, a lot of cool things like that. And they need a lot of land. But when we talk about like a binary cycle geothermal plant, how many acres are we looking at? Because I saw the one obviously in Nichols Hot Springs, and it was like, wow, this is great. But it's not like 300-400 acres, right? Like the whole, or do you need that to figure out? I mean, how much do you need?
So, that's a function of how big this resource is and how big any resource is, right? We don't know how far these systems expand or go out underneath our feet.
Oh, so you just don't know until you explore.
So I like to tell people, have you played Battleship?
Oh, of course. Hell yeah. I got little boys, man.
Okay. Well, pull out the Battleship game, and let's pull out $10,000 each.
Oh,
and we're going to have to put $5,000 on every call. What do you think? So geothermal exploration is like putting, for you and I, $5,000 on the table every time you make a call. And that's not, a literal interpretation. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, no.
Geothermal exploration, geothermal exploration and development is the single most expensive energy resource we can develop, maybe outside of nuclear. But the unknowns are what make it really difficult to develop. We can't tell what's beneath our feet 7,000 feet down. We just don't know. And so we use all of these geophysical testing methods to look and really evaluate where fault systems lie, where the hot water was. They've got this really, do you know that hot water, this is sidebar, hot water eliminates the magnetic signature of the rock where it has been superheated by these binary cycle systems, is what I understand. I'm no geophysicist, but this is part of the really cool thing about learning about geothermal and being in the industry for 17 years. I got to go fact check all this stuff. But bottom line is the geophysical methods are used for several years before anybody ever does any drilling on the ground. So one of the questions last week from our state agencies, Callie Younger, Office of Energy, the governor's office staff, species conservation, they want to know, oh man, these leases got issued. What's going to happen tomorrow? And I said, nothing.
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 Next week?
Nothing. Probably nothing.
Yeah.
And, they're looking at a 3 to 4 year horizon of exploration. And what does that look like? That 3 to 4 year horizon of exploration? Okay, with the expedited permitting out of the Trump administration, our permitting hurdles have essentially been not eliminated, but streamlined extensively for the better. Okay, we could have a whole nother topic of discussion about just the permitting of geothermal. But before we go down that rabbit hole, just the time frame for exploration. Let's just say 2 to 3, 4 years worth of exploration. The initial years of that exploration will be on geophysical work. The company will finally make a decision. We're going to place our bet on some low-cost wells. We're going to do some ground geothermometry. We're going to put in some temperature gradient wells specifically, and we're going to try and figure out the hot spot that lies beneath this table, right? You and I know there's the hot spot beneath this table that we're sitting at, but we just don't know where it is, right? So we're going to probe down there with some straws. They'll go a couple 100 feet down, and we'll figure out the highest potential success point to drop our $1.5 million drilling cost. So then we'll pull in the big drill rig, and the industry will pull in a big drill rig and drop $1.5 million to see if they can hit the resource. And hitting that resource means finding this deep fracture that's anywhere from, let's just say, 1,500, 2,000 feet down, all the way down to 7,000 feet. They want to drill vertical holes because those are the least cost right now, and they want to drill down and intercept this fracture of this geologic structure along a range front or thereby veil or wherever it might be. So they drill down, and if they hit the fracture and it has fluid in it, they can identify that fluid. They test it and say, guess what? We've got a fracture down there at 6,000 feet that's a big fracture, and it's carrying a lot of fluid, and that fluid's 300 degrees. Now we know bullseye. We've got a geothermal resource that can be developed for power. But now the question is, how big of a power resource? So that testing is done, all of the hydrogeological evaluation and engineering evaluation that goes into drilling a second hole. Now we've got the production, but now we got to figure out how to get it back in the ground, Matt, because we can't just open the valve and run it out on the playa. We're not just going to run it down the Boise River, right? We've got to get it back in the ground to make it this renewable energy, this renewable resource sustainable. So they've got to go down this fault line, what we call stepping out, and it would be like making the second call and saying, which way does the battleship go? Okay.
Gosh.
So we get a pretty good idea.
You could be on like the corner of it and just go to the right 1 foot too far. And it's like, you went the wrong way.
You went the wrong way. And it happens all the time. It happens all the time. And so they step out. The geologist decides where to make the next recommendation. I'm glad I'm not a geologist making recommendations on
this would be worse than the weatherman. Like you're
wrong. It is way worse than the weatherman.
You're wrong all the time, and it doesn't just cost you a bad day at the beach. It's like, oh, that's monetary compensation.
That's some serious money. So they step out, and in a best case scenario, they hit another area of this fracture zone, of this deep fault fracture.
That has to be the same deep fault fracture as the first one.
It has to be associated with.
It has to be
not
adjacent.
Too close enough that you can get the water back in, that you can get this brine back in the ground,
and it'll make its way eventually back over to the original resource.
Yes. So for example, at the Neal Hot Springs Power Plant, at that facility, they had a couple wells that one well in particular drilled down to about 4,000 feet below ground surface, going 4,000 feet down. And it's 3/4 or a mile away from one of the production wells. And if you put water in that injection well, in that potential injector well, it comes back into a production well within like 24 hours. So they drilled a well and it was a loss. You couldn't use the well. So that well will never be used for production on that field. But back to the footprint.
Wait, and it's a loss because going back to the original well in 24 hours is too fast?
It's too fast.
So what do you need, like a week?
Or a month.
Oh, so
3 months.
Because
or
a
year.
The time underground isn't, you're going to.
The longer the residence time,
the better.
With knowing that it comes back, the longer that residence time to support the pressure in that system, the better off you're going to be.
Because it's going to be able to interact with more of the ground, absorb more of the heat, affect the original resource as little as possible.
Affect the original resource as little as possible. Key point right there.
Got it. Wow. I was like, 24 hours, that should be good, right? You're like, how about a year?
Yeah. How about a year?
Got it.
So, but you talk about footprint, across the Great Basin, I travel all over and talk with communities, and there's a couple really interesting things. When you see that many communities and talk to different folks, the first question is, how big is it going to be? What is this thing going to really look like? So geothermal power, I like to tell folks, produces more energy on a smaller footprint than probably any other energy source we can develop, depending on how you measure the footprint, right? The site that you looked at Neil Hot Springs is about 650 acres, all in the production area. But the actual footprint of where the energy is produced is 7 acres. The actual outlying area, little access road and the pipeline to go over to the 4 production wells and the 4 injection wells adds another 13 acres. So we've got about a 20-acre site that produces 22 megawatts of power on average. That's the design capacity of that facility, I believe. So we figure about 1 acre per megawatt across the industry is what I like to tell people. No guarantees, but about an acre per megawatt.
Got it. Solar, if I install a solar panel on my
Let's
property,
talk about solar.
No, but hang on, this relates back to geothermal. Nobody comes after me for like, hey, you stole my sun. If I put like a wind turbine up, right, like a windmill, nobody comes after me for that.
Flicker.
Okay. If you find geothermal heat somewhere, does somebody come after you and say, hey man, that was my heat? Like, do you have royalties like oil?
We do. So geothermal brine is treated what they say in Latin is sui generis, has properties of both water and minerals.
Okay.
But it's treated as a mineral in all of the Western states in all cases. I don't know any place that it's not treated as a mineral, with the exception of when it becomes really low temperature. Water Resources manages geothermal resources as a mineral at high temperature and as water at lower temperatures in the direct use cases.
Gotcha. So when you're dealing, like say you find an enormous resource just south of Mountain Home, and you're like, hey man, we got 50 megawatts here. We just determine the resource, however you determine it. Who gets paid the royalty of that? Because I mean, obviously the industry has to upfront all the exploration costs. They have to upfront all these things. And then they have the capacity to sell that resource to Idaho Power for distribution or whatever it might be. But do they also have to be like, hey, Jimmy owned this place before we got here, or like this? Do you have to shell out royalties to someone?
Yeah, we do, and they do on most of the projects. They figure out who owns those mineral rights. And the crazy thing is, Matt, there are folks that went around this country in the 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s and bought up land, and turned around and sold it a month later and kept all the mineral rights.
No.
Yes.
Oh my God!
So when you go into
some trust somewhere, there's some trust somewhere you're going to be shelling out $10 million to this trust.
Well, they retain. Well, what happens is they retain the mineral rights, but you're right. It went to the family, and so the mom and dad had 7 kids, and 7 kids had 2 kids each, and now it's 14 family members, and they all get, 3% of the interest of the geothermal resources on the land where you want to explore. And so you've got to wrangle all those interests together and bring them all to the table and say, hey, does anyone speak for the group? And this is what we'd like to do.
God, I can't hear about it. We're coming up to the holidays. I can't. This is too soon. It's too close. It's too close to knowing the wrangling of family members coming together. Like, oh my gosh.
But no, Matt, you're absolutely right. And you really, the companies have, everybody in the geothermal field, they have land folks that look at those land acquisitions. But what happens when you lease a parcel of ground and the person next to you says, I don't want to lease mine? Or they say, we can't get a hold of that. Not that you can't get a hold of them, but let's say they didn't lease the ground next door. So let's say worst case scenario, you didn't lease the ground next door, and you develop this geothermal resource, and you do the calculation. And these hydrogeologists, again, beyond yours and my knowledge, that they assign heat, a measure of heat, fluid flow, and direction of flow to every cubic meter of these huge basins, right? They know where the water comes from and they know where it goes, and they test these models, and then they draw a line around it. And what they're talking about is pooling with a pool, just like a pool. There's this resource that is pooled or unitized for production. And so instead of the California model where everybody stuck their straw in the pool and sucked it dry, they say, hey, we don't need you to stick your straw in the pool. We're going to pay you your commensurate share of the production that your land contributes from your property line straight down into the resource.
So if Jerry didn't want to be engaged in this contract at all, and the geothermal engineers or the hydrologists or the water resource guys are like, all right, look, Jerry is not playing ball, we up front, but like, damn it, man, 30% of this resource pools underneath Jerry's property. We're going to pay him his fair share, his 30%.
And Jerry can say, I don't want the money, but
Jerry's crazy.
Jerry's crazy.
Yeah.
That's exactly right, because Jerry is due a check. And so for the ranchers, for the communities that we deal with, for the landowners that we deal with, geothermal is a really good opportunity because it's not going to wipe out their ranch.
Right. I was just going to say, it doesn't affect the cattle on top.
As a matter of fact, for the 20 acres of ground that we took out of production on the private lands, let's say at Neal Hot Springs, there's 20 acres that was taken out of production for agriculture. Now let's define the agriculture. 7 of that was very poor quality hay production, and another 13 acres was sagebrush rangeland cheatgrass, that whatever the carrying capacity it is, but it wasn't much. But that family will get a royalty check for as long as that facility produces energy. And they can buy all of the hay they want. And you notice the very large stacks of hay, semi-loads of hay that they can afford to have delivered regardless of the land condition.
Yeah, in that area, I mean, there was like obviously a valley, and it's like all kinds of, so a lot of it was like almost straight up.
It's all, you got this one little floodplain area and two little hay fields, and one is marginal, and the rest is rangeland. And so they are depending upon buying hay for all of their winter feed. They always did. The opportunity for geothermal to really facilitate or enhance, I shouldn't say enhance, but to facilitate the cattle operations, the farming operations, when we will go in and work with ranchers to buy some water. If we need to do drilling, all of the companies will do that. They want to utilize or help out those communities or work with the communities wherever we work with. And
again, this is in the broader picture of energy, right? Geothermal is incredibly green, right? It is, and it is baseload power.
So let me just throw this out to you. Here's the 3 big questions. They'll say, Scott, how much emissions are you going to produce? How big is the steam plume going to be? That's number 1. Number 2, how much groundwater are you going to use? You're going to drain my groundwater. And I think you and I talked a little bit about the comparison on, a geothermal resource and groundwater, things like that.
Sure.
We could talk again about that. But how much groundwater are you going to use? And then are you going to light up my community? Are you going to light up the night sky? That's another question. Earthquakes was one. How many earthquakes will you cause?
That was the thing in Oklahoma with fracking, right? They're like, they caused 100 earthquakes in a week.
Yeah, and back in the early 2000s, I think Switzerland had some injection in geothermal fields that caused some earthquakes, some felt earthquakes. So how do you answer those questions? Well, on the geothermal side, this is the fun thing about the geothermal industry. In the geothermal industry, all of us in the geothermal industry have to get really good at explaining this idea of these plants that can vary in size and scope, right? So I like to say we have to explain what has not really been engineered or designed for your property. And we have to explain that to communities and councils and commissioners who envision what will never occur. And the idea is that we're not going to produce any steam. No, this is not a steam resource. Even on steam resources, I think the industry is looking at converting from steam to binary cycle so they can put all of the condensed steam right back as a liquid form, right back into the reservoir. So we look at no steam, no emissions. Well, what does it look like then? Well, it's an giant outdoor air conditioner for these.
Look, what does your radiator look like?
Your radiator, exactly.
The grill on your car. That's essentially what it looks like. At some point, we take some heat and then we run it against these things we run it over a bunch of June bugs and whatever, and like move on with your life.
Yep. And so these outdoor radiators are sitting on stilts 30 feet tall, and they have some big fans on top of them. And just like a car radiator, just like the air conditioner in your backyard or your heat pump on the back door, they pull that air across those cooling coils and push that air up push that air through the cooling coils. Second question is do I get to use, if you're going to put this power plant here, do I get to use the power? And that's a tough one because we're selling it to the utility and it's going to go to a point of interconnection, a substation, right? It's going to go to the substation. And so I can talk to Mrs. Johnson in wherever Mrs. Johnson is. And I say, Mrs. Johnson, the community has a pool over here. And we all like to swim in the pool all summer long. But we need 4 hoses to fill the pool. And one of those hoses is your hose. But do you go to the pool and say, I only want to swim in my water? No, you don't do that. You enjoy everybody's water because we need everybody's water to fill the pool. And that's what the electric grid is like. We are filling a need in the electric grid for baseload energy. Now that pool is managed by Idaho Power or NV Energy or the California Independent System Operator, whoever it is. But geothermal has a really critical role to play for baseload energy to stabilize those resources and allow this pool to be filled all the time, right to the brim where you need it to be filled.
May I? Okay.
Yep.
The pool one, I think it's better to say a grain hopper or a silo because we're talking about consumption.
Oh,
the
that's a
pool
good
is
point.
Utilization. So it's like, listen, Miss Johnson, we're going to grow a ton of barley in your backyard. And she's like, do I get the barley? It's like, well, let me explain to you. We're going to grow this barley and then we're going to take it to the giant barley silo. And you already go and draw from the barley silo, right? She's like, yeah, I go over there. It's like, great. And it's controlled by Barley Inc., right? And she's like, yeah. It's like, okay, so we're going to take this barley and we'll pay you for whatever, but we're going to take this barley and we're going to take it to Barley Inc. and you can keep drawing from it, but they're not going to store your barley, Miss Johnson's backyard barley, in a separate, no. It all goes into the silo and we make sure that you have enough whenever you want it, but they're the ones that we just take it and sell it to them.
I can't guarantee the grain of barley that came off of your back 40 is going to get eaten by you or used by you next week.
Because we all draw from Barley Inc. Like we're all consuming out of there. We're just filling up the silo from your backyard barley.
Matt, that's a really good example. I'm going to use that one going forward.
You are welcome, sir. Because the pool one, I'm like, the pool, but you're swimming, but you're not consuming. So like, wait, why do you keep filling it up with the hoses? But the barley, it's like, oh, constantly you're drawing it down and constantly you need to be filling it back in.
That's exactly right.
Got it.
So,
got it. You're welcome.
You're welcome. No, thank you. So we talk about, steam plumes.
Sure.
No, we don't have any direct emissions. They have valve seals and leaks. Those are monitored 24/7. And they're highly instrumented. We talk about groundwater consumption. And here's a really good example of how much groundwater are you going to use? Well, we need some to make concrete. We need some water to, water the roads during construction to make sure there's no excess dust, things like that. We need some water for drilling. But the geothermal system isn't going to affect your groundwater. And she says, well, how does that work? You're pulling groundwater out of the ground. No, but these geothermal systems, Mrs. Johnson, and I say, okay, time out. What's the hottest temperature that water can be if it's unconfined and able to communicate with the atmosphere and all of the other water around in the ground? 212, or thereabouts, right? Based on elevation. So it's 212. And she can agree to that. Absolutely. We agree it's 212. So the brine that we're going to use for the geothermal system is 300 degrees, round numbers. Can we both agree now that regardless of what our concerns might be, that brine has to be in an area that is somewhat or substantially confined and pressurized? Because if it wasn't confined and pressurized, it could not exceed 212.
Sure.
And she says, yeah, there's a reluctant, I don't know how that works, but I understand. Yeah. And, there's, so it's incumbent upon the industry then to ensure that those systems are operated sustainably to make sure there isn't some, little tiny plume in that geothermal resource, which is probably a common occurrence. You get a little leak off the geothermal resource that comes to surface and somebody's swimming in it 20 miles away. It won't be 20 miles away, but wherever it might be.
I got a better one for you because that still doesn't make sense to me, but I think this is what you're.
I want to hear it. I want to hear it.
You got a pressure cooker, Miss Johnson.
Yep.
It's filled with water.
Yep.
And potatoes, because you like potatoes. Filled with water, and it leaks a little steam off the top. Now, look, these potatoes, actually, they're stubborn as hell. So they're not going to be 10 minutes or 20 minutes. This is going to be like 2 days of cooking the potatoes. Well, that steam, after a while, if we don't refill the water in the pressure cooker, those potatoes are no longer covered. You're like, everything's going to burn, right? So what we do is we have that steam, but we actually grab the water as it condenses and we put it back into the pressure cooker very carefully. Because if we don't, that water in the pressure cooker, even though it's a slow leak out of the top, it's going to run out of water eventually and no potatoes for dinner, Miss Johnson. So essentially what we do is we make sure we cannot operate sustainably for any duration of time if we are not taking the water that comes out and putting it back in. And so we are not aiming at all to deplete your water resource in a long term. Yeah, we need some for construction to build the pressure cooker, but baby, we got to refill that pressure cooker because if we don't, we're all dead.
Yep.
There
That's
you go.
A good example.
Okay, because the whole thing about like under pressure, like that doesn't really even make, I think what you're ultimately saying is we can't let all of this stuff escape, because if we do, then it goes to a gas and we lose it forever. But that doesn't articulate the need to continue refilling the resource, because if we don't recharge it with the water that can then heat up and then escape, well then like we don't have anything to grab. There's no steam coming out and everything burns.
Well, and she's in addition to that, you understand, you know exactly how this works.
I'm just trying, like that's the idea, right?
Well, it is.
Okay.
And she's also concerned about groundwater, the stuff that's on top of the geothermal brine, because there's this overlying groundwater aquifer between us and the resource.
So this is the thing I didn't understand then. So she's worried. She's like, look, you're going down 4,000 feet, but I got a well that goes to 100 feet.
100 feet. And you're going to drain my resource.
Or drain or interact with in a negative manner.
Yes.
So that's what she's worried about.
So the pressure cooker is right on. And I actually use the pressure cooker example a lot.
Okay, great.
But what she needs to know is that pressure, what I try and convey is that the pressure cooker is sealed. And if you have a glass of water outside the pressure cooker, you can still drink the water outside the glass of the pressure cooker.
Right.
We have to maintain the pressure cooker, yes, but that's independent of the glass of water you set on the table next to the pressure cooker.
Right. You essentially have to say like, no, look, we're going to have big old steel pipes that come up, that keep everything secured. They're not leaking brine. They're not messing with your water. They're going to go all the way around and then go all the way back down. And we have to make sure it doesn't mess around with anything else.
Right.
Yeah. So, gosh, man, this is wild that people came up. Like, again, I'm not an energy wonk. I've just been learning these things. It's like, who thought of this? Like, who are the people figuring out? It's like, bro, drill down 5,000 feet. There's some hot shit down there. Go get it.
Well, and you know what?
Go get it.
And just think, it was 1979 through 1982 or 3 that the Idaho National Lab did the first geothermal demonstration project at what other place than Raft River, Idaho, where they have the geothermal power plant.
It's that new? It's like this is like 40 or 50 years old?
In Idaho, yes, that was the demonstration project. The binary cycle was a real thing. But binary cycle has been around for a long time. And they were doing, I don't know the full history in binary. The oldest geothermal power generation in the world is Lauderello, Italy, where they first generated energy from the release of steam, and this little 100 kW generator, whatever the size it was. And Lauderello still operates today. It's a huge steam field resource. It's been still operating. So,
man.
But the binary cycle was proved up during the energy crisis at Raft River, Idaho. So when we had some really awesome guys, and I have to just throw the names out there. Doug Glaspie and Dan Coons have been in the mining business. They were looking to diversify. They sat through a geothermal conference in the early 2000s. And actually talked to Dr. Roy Mink and said, so Dr. Mink, if you wanted to develop a geothermal resource in Idaho, where would you go? And I think as the story goes, Roy said, I'd go down and acquire that Raft River resource from the guy that bought it from the DOE and hasn't been done anything with, and there's wells down there, and go develop that resource. And that's what they did. So this couple of private guys got together. They got some private money together. They took the company public, and Raft River Energy. Let's just call it 1980. From 1980 to 2005 or 6, these big geothermal wells sat in the ground idle. They just sat there. How many years is that?
Too many. Too many to let it sit idle.
That's 30 years. They sat there for 30 years and did nothing. And then they put them online. They went down and looked at them. They scoped them with cameras. They tested them and said, wow, we've still got hot water down here. The wells are in good, the steel is in good condition. They got a power purchase agreement, and Raft River came online. U.S. Geothermal, the little company that, the little company that could. Doug and Dan had literally built this company from the ground up and took it public, and they did a phenomenal job at Raft River, and then expanded, and they had built Neal Hot Springs and expanded down into Nevada. So that was all right here out of Boise, Idaho. So thank you, man. Doug and Dan.
Thank you, Doug and Dan.
Yeah.
Scott, listen, I know you've been traveling all week. I don't want to take any more of your time today, because I was just about to start asking about prospecting tools and like AI, but like, if you don't mind, let's save that for another day. Because again, I was listening to an episode or an interview with somebody talking about scanning imaging underneath like the Great Pyramids the other day. I'm like, can crazy. You do that but again, I don't want to like bother you here.
No.
Is there anything you want to hit? Like we don't have to solve the world's problems in one episode here. I'd love to have you back. Is there anything you want to hit here at the end?
Matt, it's been really good to sit down and talk with you about this.
This is wild.
I've never done anything like this, but the bottom line is it's great to be able to talk about it with you. And I think, as Idaho looks at geothermal, here's what I'd wrap up and say. And we do need to come back and talk about this again. There's a whole nother level of geothermal. Let me say there's a whole nother level of energy production from hot rock. And that's enhanced and advanced geothermal technologies that are far more broadly distributed across the entire country. And that is the hope of the industry, is to be able to bring these other really hot rock resources online. And we touched on that. But before let's not digress too far. With regard to the leases and the interest in geothermal in Idaho, I get phone calls literally every day at this point, at least a few a week, about what's the potential. I've got this. Where are we going to go with it? And I would say, and I said this to the governor's office to her earlier this week, temper the excitement. Geothermal is a really cool resource. It produces more energy on a smaller footprint than any other energy resource we can develop, other than maybe nuclear. Small modular reactors,
sure.
Molten salt MSRs, microreactors, whatever. It is a great resource, but it is not easy to find. The barrier to entry is cost of exploration. We're trying to get that down. And it's not going to happen overnight. So there's lots of opportunity for communities to engage with the developer or the company of interest that acquired those leases and talk about all the little unique aspects of their exploration program, the potential for development, and how long it might take. So it might be Ormat Technologies at Weiser, Idaho. It might be, CERC or whoever it might be, Zanskar, that picked up these leases, and the opportunity to talk with those companies about what they intend to do, the window in which they intend to do it, and then to be able to know along the way what this might look like. So are we going to have more geothermal? I hope so. It's going to take a little while to develop it. I would say 3 to 5 years to be, just realistic. But when it comes on, it's going to be really valuable.
God bless him, man.
So
we'll do another.
We'll do another.
We're living in the future, Scott. Yeah. I tell you, I can't thank you enough for coming in. I get so pumped just hearing about the incredible solutions to problems I didn't even know I had. Because I do have these fundamental problems of existence that I have outsourced and offloaded to other people. It's like, how do you keep the lights on? I don't know. I just pay the bill. But it's like there's somebody out there 24 hours a day trying to solve these problems. And hearing this, it's like I get to share in a little bit of the appreciation of like, oh my God, there are geniuses out there. And it's man, how awesome.
I ditto that sentiment, and I will recommend. I mean, I'm passing the Ranch podcast on to everybody that I'm talking to. It is it is. I feel the same way listening to your podcast. And so it's an honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We'll do it again. Thanks, Scott.
Yep. Bye.